You know, at first, I thought that a life sentence was the longest you could get. Boy, was I wrong. I'm your host, Yusuf, and these are the top 10 longest prison sentences you will not believe. Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's just sit here, I guess. Number 10, Terry Nichols. Convicted of 161 counts of first-degree slaughter, first-degree arson, and conspiracy by the state of Oklahoma for his part in the Oklahoma City Massacre of April 19, 1995. Also sentenced in federal court for chaos and 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter, this guy is trouble. Terry holds the record for most consecutive life sentences ever given to a single individual at 161 consecutive life sentences without parole. Due to such a large number of life sentences, adding no parole possibility, it can be also declared as the longest officially confirmed sentence ever handed in the world. Number 9, Gary Leon Ridgway. Ridgway, also known as the Green River Butcher, is an American serial executioner. He was initially convicted of 48 separate executions. As part of his plea bargain, another conviction was added, bringing the total number of convictions to 49, making him the second most prolific serial executioner in United States history, according to confirmed executions. He ended the lives of many women in the US state of Washington during the 1980s and 90s. Most of Ridgway's victims were alleged to be intimacy workers and other women in vulnerable circumstances. The press gave him his nickname after the first 5 victims were found in the Green River before his identity was known. He strangled his victims, usually by hand, but sometimes using ligatures. After strangling them, he would dump their bodies in forested and overgrown areas in King County. On November 30th, 2001, as Ridgway was leaving the Kenworth truck factory where he worked in Renton, Washington, he was arrested for the removal of 4 women, whose cases were linked to him through DNA profiling evidence. He was given 49 life sentences, 48 of them without parole, plus 480 years. Number 8, Chomoy Tipiaso. In the late 1960s, Chomoy Tipiaso started a chit fund called the May Chomoy Fund, which was made to look like an oil share with high returns. Due to Tipiaso's connections with the Air Force and Petroleum Authority, the fund was able to sustain itself for remarkably a long time. Her connections to the military were a huge factor in political and business power, and so its apparent military backing made the scheme seem legitimate. The scheme drew in 16,231 clients and was not shut down until the mid-1980s. The fund had a large number of politically powerful investors from the military and even the royal household, and as such, there were calls for the government to bail out the banks and the chit funds. After discussions with King Bhumibol Adulyadej, the nature of which were not made public, the May Chomoy Fund was shut down and Chomoy Tipiaso was arrested. She was sentenced to imprisonment for 141,078 years, but ended up only serving 8. Number 7, Dylan Roof. Perpetrator of the Charleston church tragedy, originally sentenced to execution in federal court for 9 counts of hate crimes, resulting in the victims passing away, 3 counts of hate crimes with intent to execute, 9 counts of obstruction to exercise religion, resulting in executions, and 3 counts of obstruction to exercise religion using a dangerous weapon. In the South Carolina State Court, Roof pleaded guilty to 9 counts of slaughter, 3 counts of attempted slaughter, and 1 count of possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime. Life was recommended for the 9 executions, 30 years for the 3 attempted executions, and 5 years for the possession. Currently incarcerated and awaiting execution at United States Penitentiary, Terre Haute, Indiana. Dylan was given 9 life sentences plus 95 years. Number 6, Moses Sitole. Moses Sitole was the ABC butcher of South Africa and holds a substantial sentence for his crimes. He appeared to be a mild-mannered individual to those around him. At the time of his crimes, he was managing a shell organization, Youth Against Human Abuse, ostensibly devoted to the eradication of abuse. After committing his crimes in Attridgeville near Pretoria, Sitole moved his focus to Boksburg and eventually to Cleveland. By 1995, he had claimed over 30 victims, sparking nationwide panic. In some cases, he would later phone the victims' families for no apparent reason other than to taunt them. At one point, President Nelson Mandela visited Boksburg in prison to appeal for public assistance in apprehending the butcher. Sitole was sentenced to 2,410 years with a minimum of 930 years. Number 5, Bernard Henry McGinn. McGinn was born into an Irish Republican family in Castleblaney, County Monaghan, Ireland. In 1978, Desi O'Hare and McGinn ended Thomas Johnston, a former member of the UDR in Katy, South Armagh. In 1979, McGinn was arrested at a disused farmhouse and charged with possession of explosives. He failed to turn up at his trial and was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment in absentia. After several months on the run, he was arrested in Dundalk following a 27-hour siege, during which he held a family hostage with a pistol and a hand grenade. McGinn was released from prison in 1987 and joined the IRA's South Armagh Brigade. Initially viewed as an outsider, within several years he became a trusted member of the brigade, helping assemble devices used by the IRA in England. The devices made went on to cause mass tragedies, which landed him a 490-year sentence. Number 4. Nathan Dunlap. On December 14, 1993, 4 employees were shot and executed, and a 5th employee was seriously injured at a Chuck E. Cheese's restaurant in Aurora, Colorado, United States. The perpetrator, 19-year-old Nathan Dunlap, a former employee of the restaurant, was frustrated about being fired 5 months prior to the shooting and sought revenge by committing the attack. He fled the scene of the shooting with stolen money and restaurant items. Dunlap was found guilty over 4 counts of first-degree slaughter, attempted slaughter, and other charges, and was sentenced to execution by lethal injection on May 17, 1996. A judge initially set an execution date for him in August 2013, but Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper signed a temporary reprieve that would postpone Dunlap's execution date. Dunlap's execution sentence was commuted to life in prison without parole in 2020 after Colorado abolished the execution penalty. He was given 1 life sentence without parole plus 108 years. Number 3. Pudit Kithirathilok. Pudit was convicted of 2,653 counts of fraud. He admitted running a Ponzi scheme whereby he promised investors artificially high financial returns. About 40,000 people were persuaded to pour more than $160 million into his companies. Prosecutors told the court that Pudit organized seminars where attendees were encouraged to invest in what he said were businesses linked to property development, beauty, used cars, and exports, among other things. They recommended 5 years for each count and an additional 10 years, totaling 13,275 years. Due to his confession, his sentence was halved to 6,637 years and 6 months. Under Thailand law, though, a convicted fraudster can't serve above 20 years. He will be released in 2037. Number 2. Billy Glenn Woolsey and Jackie Dean Whitlock. The pair broke out of Alfalfa County Jail in Oklahoma. Woolsey was being held on kidnap charges, and Whitlock had been sentenced to 10 years for receiving stolen property. The men overpowered an officer and stole his police car, later abandoning the car but taking with them an AR-15 automatic rifle and an M1 carbine, which they used to steal a pickup truck from an oil field worker. When they were located 2 days later, they led police on a 32-mile high-speed chase through Bryan and Marshall counties, exchanging gunfire with them. 2 officers were shot, later making a full recovery, and 1 more was treated for injuries from broken glass. A Bryan County judge gave them 2,000 years each, 1,000 years for shooting with intent to end a life, 500 years for possession of stolen property, and 500 years for running a roadblock. Tried separately in Marshall County, they additionally each received 2 life sentences and 20 years. At number 1, Api Chort and Prapa Sorn. Originally sentenced to 1,446 years for defrauding the public, they were arrested after numerous complaints. The Lamegate Seafood restaurant had begun selling various food vouchers that required customers to pay in advance. One such deal offered a seafood meal at $28 for 10 people, far cheaper than their usual prices. Initially, those who bought the vouchers were able to claim their meals at the restaurant, but a long waiting list meant an advance booking of up to several months. But by March, the company announced its closure, claiming that it could not get hold of enough seafood to meet the demand. It offered to refund customers who had bought vouchers. About 375 out of 818 customers who complained got their money back. The 2 were arrested, later convicted and sentenced to 1,446 years, although their sentences were cut in half due to the guilty plea. It seems that prisons are scary no matter what. It's full of prisoners, it's scary because of the inmates. It's empty, well, it's haunted. There really is no winner. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 most haunted prisons in the world. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, we all go a little mad sometimes. Number 10, Alcatraz. The Rock was the ultimate American prison. It was the place where scores of the country's worst criminal offenders, bloodletters, bad men, and escape artists called the end of the line. The initial prison was built in 1859, but fell into disuse by the 1920s. It was then reopened in 1933 to be an escape-proof federal prison. It was a brutal place of punishment and confinement with few privileges. In 1946, several inmates attempted a violent and bloody escape from the Rock, but failed. There were a handful of other escapes, but only one successful escape in 1962. Using handmade rubber rafts and dummies with real hair, vanished into the dark waters of the bay. Alcatraz was closed down 1 year later, in 1963. Regarded as one of America's most haunted places, ghosts have been widely reported ever since, even by staff members of the National Park Service, which now operates the property. Ghosts have been sighted along with strange sounds, screams, yells, weeping, and eerie music. Number 9. Ohio State Reformatory. The Ohio State Reformatory, made famous in the film The Shawshank Redemption, was opened in 1896, and it saw untold thousands of prisoners during its years of operation. And while once applauded as a place that could humanely reform first-time offenders, the conditions deteriorated to the point that it became known for abuse, torture, and execution. Already considered overcrowded and inhumane by the 1930s, the massive prison was kept open until 1986, even after a federal lawsuit was filed by the inmates that cited that it was unfit for human occupation. Since the closing of the reformatory, stories have circulated that it is haunted by the tormented spirits of former inmates, guards, and prison officials who have simply never left. Apparitions have been reported, footsteps have been heard, and unsettling encounters have taken place in the cells where the inmates once lived, suffered, and sometimes passed away. Number 8. Lake County Jail. The Lake County Jail, located in the county seat of Crown Point, was built in 1908 and enlarged 20 years later. At that time, county sheriffs were required to live at the jail, and so the combined residence and jail included all the facilities needed for its purpose as a law enforcement institution. Located within the walls were the family's living area, warden's residence, department offices, 150 cells, maximum security accommodations, institutional kitchen, food storage, heating and cooling systems, barbershop, and a garage. It was considered to be one of the finest in Indiana and thought to be escape-proof. However, on March 3rd, 1934, gangster John Dillinger proved it to be otherwise when he made a daring escape that gave the jail its continuing infamy. The jail remained in operation until the 1970s, when it became a historic site. As restoration has continued over the last 2 decades, stories have emerged about a haunting at the jail. Apparitions have been seen in cells and corridors, strange photographs have been taken, doors open and close by themselves, lights turn on and off, and disembodied footsteps and voices have been reported by volunteers and visitors alike. What do you think they have in the garage? Comment down below. I personally think it's a Lotus. Number 7. Pottawatomie County Jail. Built in 1885, the old Pottawatomie County Jail is one of the most unusual houses of incarceration in America. The jail has a 3-tier cell block with 10 cells on each tier. It was originally designed to rotate continuously throughout the night by means of a water wheel in the basement, earning it the nickname of the Squirrel Cage Jail. In this way, all of the prisoners could be watched from a central location. Unfortunately, the 45-ton cell block was simply too heavy to work right, and it became stuck frequently. Eventually, the jailers gave up on the plan, and a night guard had to be hired. The cylinder continued to be used until 1960, when a prison passed in his cell and the cell block jammed, trapping the body in the cell for several days. After that, cell doors were cut into every cell. The jail was closed down in 1969, and during its history, 4 passes occurred within its walls. One man passed away from a heart attack, another in a fall when he tried to write his name on the ceiling, another ended himself in his cell, and the last after an accident when an officer accidentally shot himself in the confusion of protecting the jail from an angry mob during the Farmers' Holiday Strike of 1932. It's no surprise that these unlucky individuals, along with others, are believed to still linger at the old jail. Number 6. West Virginia Penitentiary. The prison was built on the edge of Moundsville in 1866. The prison remained open for 129 years, finally closing down in 1995. During that time, the structure housed thousands of prisoners. Many lost their lives here through both state-sanctioned executions and during prison violence. Since its closure, the prison has become known as one of the most haunted sites in history. Staff members and visitors alike have reported ghosts in North Hall, where the most dangerous inmates were housed, in the execution chamber where Old Sparky sent many to an early grave, and the Hole, a brutal solitary confinement area that often drove inmates to insanity and thoughts of ending themselves. With passings, violence, executions, and horrible conditions combining to make a terrifying haunting, ghost hunters have flocked to the former penitentiary over the years. Visitors claim to have experienced the sound of phantom footsteps, voices and noises that have no explanation, inexplicable cold chills, overwhelming feelings of panic, and more. Number 5. Missouri State Prison. During its operation, it saw many infamous prisoners, including Charles Pretty Boy Floyd, James Earl Ray, and Bobby Greenlee's kidnappers Carl Austin Hall and Bonnie Heady. They were executed at the prison. In 1954, there was a major riot at the penitentiary. The Missouri State Highway Patrol, Missouri National Guard, and police departments from Jefferson City, St. Louis, and Kansas City, Missouri, were called in to help quell the disturbance. When it was all over, 4 inmates had been executed, 29 had been injured, and there had been 1 attempt on someone's own life. 4 guards had been seriously injured and several buildings had been burned. During its operation, 40 inmates were executed in the gas chamber, and Time magazine once called it the bloodiest 47 acres in America for the frequent violence inside its walls. It probably comes as no surprise that since its closure, the penitentiary has become a hotspot for paranormal activity. Staff members and visitors have reported dozens of eerie encounters with lingering spirits, which have been seen, heard, and encountered firsthand. Number 4. Shrewsbury Prison. The Shrewsbury Prison in Shropshire is one of the oldest prisons in the UK, and in addition to its dark history, it's a given that this jail is one of the most haunted in the UK as well. This prison opened up all the way back in 1793, all the way until 2013, meaning 2 centuries of people went through this place. During the Victorian period, large audiences would assemble to see public executions, some of which were people who had been given the execution penalty for crimes like stealing bread. Apart from that, this prison went through many other public executions, torturing, and many taking their own lives. Visitors to the prison claim that a shadow man lurks in the prison's A-wing. It's said that he's a former police officer, since they are known to scare people away from the A-wing as if they were still working their job. Oddly enough, this jail has an escape room within the cells of the former inmates, so if you were looking for something for a real experience, that would be your best bet, just for the price of £69. Number 3. Wyoming Territorial Prison. The Wyoming Territorial Prison in the city of Laramie opened its doors in 1873, and over its time of being active, it would have many problems with overcrowding, causing many prisoners to be bunched together in already terrible living conditions. This prison is not like the other typical haunted prisons. It didn't have horrific executions, nor did it have riots or mistreatment. Instead, this prison is haunted due to a select few spirits that chose to stick around here for whatever reason. The spirit is believed to be that of Julius Greenwelch, who was an inmate in the 1890s. He was set there because he executed his wife after finding her at his favorite brothel. During his days at the prison, he became so notorious for his talent in cigar rolling that he was allowed to set up a cigar making business while behind bars. However, in a few years, he would pass away from a heart attack, causing his business to never grow the way he envisioned. Ever since, the prison has parts of it smell like cigar smoke, with the guards and locals claiming the smell is the spirit of Julius. Number 2. Napier Prison. Located in Napier Hill, New Zealand is the Napier Prison. Built in 1862, this prison lasted over 130 years until it eventually closed in 1993. Now, this prison was once used as an orphanage and then a psychiatric hospital, so it's really no surprise at all that this place is considered one of the most haunted places in New Zealand. During the time it was active, this place was the last place many people saw in their lives, because many execution sentences were done inside of this prison. The most notorious of the execution sentences was the one given to Roland Edwards. He was a mass slaughterer who was sentenced to execution in the gallows, but ever since, he has been said to haunt the prison with a special appearance on the anniversary of his passing. He passed away on July 15th, so this is when many paranormal investigators visit the prison for the chance to speak to Roland. Now, there are ghost tours that go through the prison, but make sure you never go alone, because nighttime security guards often report unexplained footsteps and doors slamming on their own when they walk the grounds alone. Number 1. Wyoming Frontier Prison. Located in Rawlins, Wyoming, the Wyoming Frontier Prison has the reputation of being one of the toughest prisons in the Wild West. Opened in 1901, it housed some of the most violent inmates, featured a dungeon, botched executions, and was known for rampant violence. Now a museum, employees and visitors alike have reported ghostly encounters. There have been apparitions spotted in the cell blocks and reports of a malevolent spirit in the dungeon who has threatened visitors. The prison is so notorious that it was featured on an episode of Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures, and ghost hunters have captured orbs on camera. The museum offers haunted Halloween night tours if you want to have a ghostly encounter of your own. Ever wonder what the weirdest, scariest, most insane stories come from prison? Well, I wish I wasn't so curious, because some of these had me staying awake at night. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are 10 scary prison horror stories that actually happened. Anyways, it's time to go to prison. At number 10, something's wrong in the cafeteria. An inmate in a female prison describes one of her experiences in the prison chow hall. There was a woman there. She had tried to wipe out her mother, and while the mother was escaping, she ran her over, put it in reverse, floored it back over her again, and finally put it in drive over her one last time. The mother was actually extremely harmful and was in the same prison in a different part. The inmate goes on, explaining the odd behavior of the prisoner. The daughter would always have her arms in her shirt. You'd only see her arms when she was sitting, like eating or something. She's across from me one day, eating, and I see her drop a pile of something. I immediately was like, what the heck? You can't have stuff in the chow hall. What is this girl doing? It was kind of loud when she dropped it, so it wasn't laundry. It looked kind of like meat. How and why does she have meat? We're eating spaghetti right now. Suddenly, the inmate realized what the woman dropped. That's her innards, just falling out of her torso onto the floor. She's struggling to gather all of it. It looks slippery. After that, I noticed her dropping her innards onto the floor on a regular basis and had to stop being around her at all. That's freaky. You'd think that prison doctors would sew her back up. At number 9, a new inmate describes their first week in prison and sitting at the wrong table. The first week of my 12-year prison set was the worst. I was a skinny 20-year-old with no criminal history, and it takes a while to learn that most people are mostly talk. I accidentally sat at the black table at chow, made a point of staying there and eating with them when they showed up to avoid offending them, was labeled a race traitor by the whites, and was told someone would be coming to hurt me. Nobody came, as most people don't want to be inconvenienced with a long stint in the hole for harming someone for something so small. But I slept with a pen cap hooked to my watch band, holding a sharp pencil against my wrist in case I had to jab someone in defense. Living for days with the crippling fear of imminent doom messed with my nerves. My hands shake a little now. At number 8, controlling your nerves is hard for anyone. Knowing when to show them and when to be completely straight-faced is harder. Day 1. Everything is just as scary as can be. You don't really know where you will be safe, if anywhere. Every time you're passing someone, are they going to shank you? Are they going to cold punch you in the face? Chow time was total panic mode. Hundreds of merciless thugs in a close group outnumbering the guards 25-1. If something went down, you would be gone before order was restored. When incidents happen, you have to hide, but not cower. You have to keep your back to the wall so you can fend off any incoming strikes. As days went on, you became more aware of when to be alarmed, but there are plenty of sneak attacks that come out when all is calm. One time during chow, a squad of a few people were coming to get someone and they had to pass my direction. They weren't coming after me, but I didn't know that until they passed me. That was the most scary moment. I was almost frozen, yet ready to throw down. You can't show emotions in these situations either. You can't let the dude sitting across from you see you panicking. At number 7. Being a new inmate is hard enough. What makes it harder is when something crazy happens on your first day. Here's a horror story from an inmate's first day in jail. My very first time in jail, when I was 18, was a bit of a trip. Went through the whole entry process where they make you feel like a piece of garbage, threaten you, etc. Then the group I was with were split up to head to different cell blocks. My foot was barely through the cell door when a siren started blaring and we were told to face the wall and not move. A bunch of guards rushed the cell block, and after a couple of minutes, they rushed a guy covered in blood past us, followed by a guy I assumed was the cause of the blood. Find out later that they had an argument about a book. So one guy slashed the other's face repeatedly with a razor blade melted into a toothbrush. I thought that my entire stay was going to be filled with stuff like that, but I lucked out and knew someone in there, so I actually had it pretty easy. At number 6, an inmate describes the sudden switch in culture, purpose, and the norms of actions. I suppose seeing people getting taken advantage of all the time and then not caring was the worst. New guys coming in and getting ripped off on trades and stuff. People with social, developmental issues just getting their food taken from them. Also, the psychology of people without goals gets weird. What was worse was just becoming a part of that world. There are so many people there that have their rights taken away from them on a regular basis and don't care anymore. They choose to place value on being able to make others fear them. They stop thinking about the world beyond the walls and just get all wrapped up in the weird culture of the place. At number 5, an inmate tells us what they think about the prison system and how it affects people inside and outside. I also think people underestimate how much our prison system really hurts people. Being in for not a long time and in a low-risk tank didn't matter. Ended up with some PTSD. I couldn't fall asleep without a knife in my hand for the first 4 months I was released. I had nightmares and didn't sleep a night through sober for the same period of time. Our system does nothing to rehabilitate anyone. They throw you all together and take people who make stupid mistakes and expose them to hardened criminals who happen to be pretty good at leaving impressions on people. At number 4, this guard explains his scariest experience at Rikers Island. I used to work as a prison guard on Rikers Island. I remember one experience that really sent a shiver down my spine. Still does, actually. This was when I was a bit of a novice. I had sort of an idea it would be hard, but I didn't know how hard. I was passing out pieces of chicken to the inmates, and I handed a piece to this tall, skinny guy, and he still had his hand out. Give me another one. I figured he was trying to test my limits since I was the newest guard, so of course I told him no, because I didn't think I should send the message I could be pushed around. He got kind of mad, but for the time being, he cooperated. A couple days later, that same guy motioned for me to come over. Hey, don't you live on my exact address, and your wife's name is my wife's name? I was stunned for a second there. I still have no idea how he found that out. You know, a little extra chicken is nice once in a while. At number 3, a bone-chilling occult incident happened to a guard at this prison. Here's what he said happened. One night, I was working in a different area, but I got a call on the radio. Flash, flash, flash. Offender in need of emergency medical care. That was the initiation of ICS, and usually meant there was a problem. Usually a fight or severe injury. Turns out, this was an execution, and I swear this is something out of True Detective. There's an inmate face down in his bunk, tied up with bed sheets, deceased, with blood everywhere. The executed inmate was shirtless and had runes carved into his back. The other inmate was curled into a ball, muttering, "Demons, demons." It turns out the executed inmate wasn't actually passed away, but really close to it. As for the executioner, no one could get a motive. One of the neighboring cellmates said he heard everything and described all the screams and the inmate saying that demons are coming. At number 2, an escape plan that was found out by a guard early. I was a correctional officer in a maximum security prison for 7 years. There were 5 inmates with life sentences on a prisoner work crew that I supervised that were planning an escape. One of my confidential informants calmly walked into my office one day and told me that they were planning on removing me in order to escape. That night, I searched the warehouse and found 14 shanks with my name on them. We got all the bad guys in the end. No one got hurt. At number 1, a story so crazy it sounds straight from a movie for our number 1 spot. I spoke to a former inmate after his release who had developed severe PTSD from some of the things he witnessed while incarcerated. One of the stories was that he was playing cards with some guys, and one of them was smoking a cigarette. Another inmate who was not playing with them approached the table and asked the guy smoking if he could get shorts on the cigarette. Shorts means before you finish smoking, you gave the cigarette to someone else, so they got the last few puffs of the cigarette before putting it out. The smoker agreed. The inmate wandered off and they went back to playing cards. Well, the guy playing cards must have forgotten and finished the cigarette. A little while later, the inmate came back to the table asking for the short, and the guy at the table told him that he had forgotten about it and finished the cigarette. Guy wanders off again and they go back to playing cards. Shortly afterwards, the inmate who wanted the shorts comes back to the table, comes up behind the player, pulls his head back and starts shanking him with a pen. Hopefully you'll never need this information, but if you do end up in prison sometime in the future, this video might be useful. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 scary things no one tells you about prison. Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get going. Number 10, the food. The food served at prisons is most known for being worse than a school cafeteria. The conditions at many institutions in the United States are being accused of starving their inmates with portions that are not even enough to fill a 5-year-old child, according to an inmate. Records have shown that the food not only tastes terrible, but has on one occasion caused an inmate to lose 90 pounds in less than 6 months due to the small portions. Here's what the average meal includes at Georgia Gordon County Jail. For breakfast, half a cup of canned fruit, half a cup of fruit juice, optional coffee, 1 cup of cold cereal, and 1 cup of 2% milk, 3 servings of margarine, 1 biscuit, and 1.5 cups of country gravy. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, that's because the inmates are not served lunch and are fed 10 to 14 hours apart. Number 9, the importance of money. You know how the saying goes, money rules the world. In prison, anything you want to do that involves the outside world requires a stack of cash. In prison, the average price monthly to keep in touch with the outside world is $588. $588 buys you 300 phone minutes, the monthly limit, at 21 cents a minute for domestic long distance calls, 2,700 monthly minutes of emailing, 5 monthly video visits, and the maximum monthly limit at commissary. One inmate had this to say: "My friend was my iron girl for $10 a month. She ironed my khaki uniform 5 days a week. That was her hustle. The day before commissary, she would show up at my cell door with a list. On a scrap of paper were $10 worth of commissary items, 2 bags of tortilla chips, a toothbrush, and a box of laundry soap for a month's work." Number 8, what commissary is. Commissary is a way for prisoners to still contribute to the economy while locked up. Yes, you heard that right. Inmates are basically forced to contribute to the economy by purchasing extremely marked up things while in prison just to sustain themselves. The items sold at commissary often vary from extra snacks like tortilla chips mentioned earlier to toiletries like toilet paper, tissues. They even sell soap occasionally. The Texas prison system alone generated $100 million in revenue in 2009. There is also a limit placed on each inmate on how much money they are allowed to spend per month on commissary. Number 7, jobs in prison. Prison jobs are very common. most of them being derivatives from one main job. Because some prisons require every prisoner to have a job, but not many jobs are available to start with. The occupations have been trickled down and changed. Take for instance a janitor. Seems straightforward, but it's anything but. Since everyone needs a job, janitors will have specific areas they must mop, from one end of the cell block to the middle. Then someone else goes from the middle to the other end. There are jobs for swatting flies, handing out cups during chow time, and even helping in the kitchen if you're lucky. Number 6. How many guards there really are. This one is more scary for the guards than the inmates. Most prisons are very overcrowded. This means that there is a huge disparity in the number of guards and inmates. Sometimes the ratio of guards to inmates is as crazy as only 1 guard to 100 inmates. This means that if things got out of hand, perhaps during a prison break, riot, or even just a fight, the guards could be overwhelmed, and this has happened before multiple times. Guards aren't invincible. Although the conditions in prison are very hard for prisoners, that doesn't mean they can't find a way to cause chaos. If a fight or a riot were to start, the entire prison could be engulfed in it, and the guards could be perhaps overwhelmed. Number 5. Speaking of riots, did you know that inmates prepare for riots? Contrary to popular belief, prison riots are well planned. One correctional officer said this about the topic: inmates train for riots. At yard time, you'll see a ton of them doing martial arts together. Sometimes they'll start a fight with 3 or 4 guys just to see what our response is. That way they're able to work up a counter for it. They figure out what our moves are, and then they practice their methods for beating us while we watch. You'd think we might be able to turn that right around and train to counter their new methods, but again, there's no money for training. Number 4. The mean guards actually don't last all that long. We've all heard of mean prison guards treating the inmates poorly. In every prison movie, there's that cliche of a correctional officer yelling at the inmates and being rude or disrespectful.
You address me as Mr. Correctional Officer.
One correctional officer actually shared his experience with one of these guards. We had one lieutenant come in and treat the inmates like dirt, calling them names and acting like the hard guards from the movies. What he didn't account for is how much time you have to spend alone with these guys. One day, he went to investigate a fight between 2 inmates, but it turned out to be a diversion. 2 other inmates came up from behind and ambushed him. He was stabbed 61 times before he could signal the officer in the control room to open the door and let him in. He survived, but he's not exactly running marathons these days. As you can tell, the guards have to respect the prisoners, as they have a disadvantage with how many guards there are compared to inmates. Number 3. The inmates are always listening. One guard might spill his heart to another guard about his impending divorce without realizing that the prisoner working as a janitor in the next room is listening in. Then that dude sells the information to an inmate with a grudge, and boom, the whole prison knows Sergeant Peters couldn't satisfy his wife. You could spend 2 or 3 weeks working a day shift and then get shoved over to a graveyard shift at a moment's notice. It affects you. Exhaustion slows down your reflexes, and guys with slow reflexes don't do so great against well-rested dudes rushing them with knives. Well, the inmates know when our schedules change, and they take advantage of that too. Again, they're always watching, looking for a weakness. A correctional officer had that to say about the topic. Number 2. The boredom. Have you ever been put in timeout as a kid and had to look at a wall or something for like 5 minutes? I know I have, and I usually can't even wait for 5 minutes because of the boredom. Prison is like being on timeout, but it's for months or years on end. Prisoners often have very little to do inside, most of them occupying themselves with jobs if they can. If the prisoner has some free time, they'll probably be reading books, studying textbooks, writing poetry, and even painting. A lot of inmates become interested in the arts while inside, as it gives them a source of creative freedom and endless imagination. Number 1. Prison ingenuity. Inmates locked up for a long time have to make do with what they have available to them. Inmates aren't allowed to indulge in certain beverages, so they make it themselves. There have been many reports over the years of prisoners creating some sort of prison wine called Pruno. Pruno is made in their toilets, where they ferment fruits to get a form of a certain chemical that makes people woozy. The prison wine isn't as strong as the real thing and has some side effects, like sometimes making inmates enraged and crazy. Inmates have also found ways to get tattoos while inside with makeshift tools and ink. If you see any of these guys in prison, you're probably gonna have a bad day. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 most feared men in prison. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's look into it. Number 10. Pascal Payet. Let's count up the things he's done to get himself into French prison. His original sentence was 30 years for an execution in 1997. Next, he got 6 years for a jailbreak in 2001, and then 7 years for organizing a 2003 jailbreak, another 5 years for a jailbreak in 2007, and finally, 15 years for armed robberies and assaults on police while an escaped prisoner in 2007. All of those crimes give him a grand total of 63 years. By July 2007, Payet was one of the most closely surveyed prisoners in France and was never kept at the same prison for more than 6 months. He had been officially classified as a prisoner under especially high surveillance and placed in solitary confinement. Despite these measures, on July 14, 2007, taking advantage of Bastille Day celebrations, 4 masked men hijacked a helicopter from Cannes' Mandelieu Airport. They used it to free Payet from his solitary confinement in a prison in Grasse. Number 9. Alfred George Hines. Hines was an amazing escape artist. He escaped from Nottingham prison after sneaking through the locked doors and over a 20-foot prison wall, for which he became known in the press as Houdini Hines. He worked as a builder-decorator in Ireland and throughout Europe until his arrest by detectives of Scotland Yard in 1956 after 248 days as a fugitive. After his arrest, Hines brought a lawsuit against authorities charging the prison commissioners with illegal arrest and used the incident as a means to plan his next escape by having a padlock smuggled into him while at the law courts. 2 guards escorted him to the toilet, but when they removed his handcuffs, Hines bundled the men into the cubicle and snapped the padlock onto screw eyes that his accomplices had earlier fixed to the door. He escaped into the crowd on Fleet Street, but was captured at an airport 5 hours later. Hines would make his 3rd escape from Chelmsford prison less than a year later. He then returned to Ireland, where he lived for 2 years as a used car dealer under the name William Herpert Bishop, before his arrest after being stopped in an unregistered car. Number 8. Jack Sheppard. Jack Sheppard is perhaps the most celebrated criminal in England's history. He was originally arrested in 1724 after thieving and burglary. The man then went on to escape 4 times from prison, each time in an extravagant manner and being reported on heavily. Sheppard was as known for his attempts to escape from prison as he was for his crimes. An autobiographical narrative, thought to have been ghostwritten by Daniel Defoe, was sold at his execution, quickly followed by popular plays. The characters of Macheath in John Gay's The Beggar's Opera in 1728 was based on Sheppard, keeping him in the limelight for over 100 years. He returned to the public consciousness around 1840, when William Harrison Ainsworth wrote a novel entitled Jack Sheppard, with illustrations by George Cruikshank. The popularity of his tale and the fear that others would be drawn to emulate his behavior led the authorities to refuse to license any plays in London with Jack Sheppard in the title for 40 years. Number 7. Frank Lee Morris. Frank Morris was born in Washington, D.C. His parents abandoned him when he was 11, so he spent the rest of his childhood in foster homes, an orphan. He was convicted of his first criminal offense at 13, and by his late teens had been arrested for crimes ranging from narcotics possession to armed robbery. He spent most of his early years in jail serving lunch to prisoners. Later, he was arrested for grand larceny in Miami Beach, car theft, and armed robbery. Morris reportedly ranked in the top 2% of the general population in intelligence, as measured by IQ testing. He had an IQ of 133. He served time in Florida and Georgia, that escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving 10 years for bank robbery. He was recaptured a year later while committing a burglary and sent to Alcatraz on January 20th, 1960 as inmate number AZ-1441. He was a part of the infamous 5-person crew who managed to escape Alcatraz. The crew used a raft made of raincoats and fake heads they'd sculpted during their time there to trick the guards. Number 6. Richard Lee McNair. McNair was sent to prison for a robbery gone wrong, ending in the execution of a man and another man being shot 4 times. He has escaped multiple times from several prisons, but managed to dissuade police from sending him to a maximum security prison because it would be too far for his parents for them to visit. He then acquired a job at the prison fixing mailbags. After several months, McNair designed a way to leave the prison by hiding in a pallet of mailbags he'd fixed, and that was shrink wrap. He waited for a forklift to deliver him to a truck, which drove him an hour and 15 minutes away from the prison, where he cut himself out and began jogging off. Hours after escape from Pollock, McNair was stopped by police officer Carl Bordelon. McNair had no identification and proceeded to give Officer Bordelon the alias of Robert Jones. When asked again 5 minutes later, he gave a different alias, Jimmy Jones, though the officer did not notice the different answer. McNair laughed and joked with the officer, and even as the officer got a matching description of the inmate, McNair appeared collected and calm. He successfully convinced Bordelon that he was jogging and in town to help on a post-Katrina roofing project, allowing him to go back to jogging within 10 minutes. inmates. Number 5. J. Jr. Sigler and his loyal family and friends. In his 8th year of a 20-year jail sentence, J. Jr. Sigler, an inmate charged with armed robbery at the infamous Everglades Correctional Institution, decided to plan a prison escape strategy that saw him escape from prison with the help of his mother, Sandra Sigler, and a few of his friends. He escaped in broad daylight when 3 of his friends rammed an 18-wheeled truck through 4 prison fences, followed by a car driven by his mother. After escaping successfully, Jay and his friends swapped vehicles at a local mall. Jay was executed in an attempt to flee after realizing that they were being followed. The car he was driving slammed into an oncoming vehicle, resulting in his passing. Number 4. Antonio Ferrara. Ferrara, 35, who emigrated to France with his family in the 1980s, was in Fresnes prison in Val-de-Marne, having been jailed for bank robbery. He escaped when a gang set fire to cars in the local area to create a diversion, before raking the guard posts with automatic rifles and smashing down the door and interior walls with rocket launchers. They gave Ferrara explosives that allowed him to blow off the bars of his cell. He had previously arranged to commit a minor act of disobedience so as to be placed in a punishment wing, which was well located for the escape. It took 3 days of deliberations for the verdict to be pronounced at the Cour d'Assises de Paris after a 10-week trial. In total, 18 accomplices were sentenced, while 2 suspects were acquitted. Punishments ranged from suspended sentences to a variety of jail terms, including 4 of 15 years each. The men were convicted of crimes including aiding and abetting escape, destroying goods with explosives, burning cars, and transporting weapons. Number 3. Stephen J. Russell. Stephen J. Russell is an American con artist, known for escaping from prison multiple times. On March 20th, 1998, Russell posed as a millionaire from Virginia in an attempt to legitimize a $75,000 loan from Nations Bank in Dallas. When bank officials became suspicious and alerted the police, Russell feigned a heart attack and was transported to the hospital. Russell was placed on security watch, but he impersonated an FBI agent and called the hospital on his cell phone to tell them he could be released. U.S. Marshals later tracked down Russell in Florida, where they arrested him on April 5th, 1998, when he went to retrieve the facts. Russell was sentenced to a total of 144 years in prison, 99 years for the escapes, and 45 years for subsequent scams. Number 2. Jason Barnum. The eyeball man, Jason Barnum, was sentenced to 22 years in prison for shooting an Alaska police officer. Barnum's offenses were driven by a serious substance addiction, reports The Independent. What made him even more dangerous and intimidating was his tattoo-filled visage. Barnum had one of his eyeballs completely tattooed. The shooting happened when police were investigating home burglaries and car thefts. Officers were inspecting a hotel in 2012 when Barnum opened fire from a bathroom. 2 officers shot back, striking Barnum in the arm, and 1 officer was injured. Barnum later admitted to committing thefts and burglaries to feed a substance addiction. Number 1. Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was an American criminal who spent the last 42 years of his life in prison after being convicted of 4 separate executions while imprisoned for armed robbery, one of which was overturned. Silverstein spent the last 36 years of his life in solitary confinement for executing corrections officer Merle Klutz at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois. Prison authorities described him as a brutal executioner and a former leader of the Aryan Brotherhood prison gang. Silverstein maintained that the dehumanizing conditions inside the prison system contributed to the 3 executions he committed. He was held in a specially designed cell in what is called Range 13 at ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. He was the longest held prisoner in solitary confinement within the Bureau of Prisons at the time of his passing. Many prison guards refused to talk to Silverstein out of respect for Klutz. Thanks for watching, like the video and leave a comment if you found this video interesting, and we'll see you next time.